First, I'm going to start off by introducing our great panelists here who are going to start this conference off with really telling you the voice of the folks who have been there and who have transitioned themselves to really put a real voice on what it is we're doing here this morning. Blas Vilalobos is the Community Programs Manager at U.S. Vets. He served in the Marine Corps from October 1999 until 2003, deployed to Iraq in 2003, and upon separating from the Marine Corps, he began taking classes at Long Beach City College and then transferred to Cal State Long Beach and graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Mr. Vilalobos then went to graduate from USC with a master's in social work with a concentration in community organization, planning, and administration, and a sub-concentration in military social work. So if we could please welcome Mr. Vilalobos to the panel. Next is Joseph Adams. He is the Senior Administrative Analyst with LA County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. He is a veteran of Operation New Dawn, where he served as a logistics officer with the Aviation Support Battalion in Taji, Iraq. Mr. Adams was awarded the Combat Action Badge for his service in Iraq. Mr. Adams is currently started with LA County as a bus driver and is now the Senior Administrative Analysis with the county with Strategic Workforce Planning Team and is now working with the Veterans Hiring Initiative. He holds a bachelor's degree in business management and is currently pursuing his master's degree in supply chain management and logistics. So if we could welcome Mr. Adams. And finally, but not least, Mr. Stephen Cleary. Mr. Cleary served in the United States Navy after earning a Naval ROTC scholarship and served as a Supply Corps officer. Mr. Cleary deployed to Kosovo, Iraq, and many other countries. After separating from the Navy, he successfully pursued life in the corporate world and has worked for many Fortune 500 companies and is now the president of TAP 2.0. Mr. Cleary. What we'll do is we'll start off with the panelists kind of providing some personal experiences for us. So, Mr. Adams, if you would like to start, if you could tell the audience what was your experience with transferring out of the military and into the civilian world and what type of support you received or didn't receive.
Well, for starters, I'm still a service member. I'm in the National Guard. So I transitioned from my deployment, closed that out, but over the course of time, working with having an employer, bouncing back and forth through different types of training events, different small deployments with the National Guard, there was a realization that I needed to make a stand with the company, and that was my waking point of how I was going to go about my transition, and what was going to work for me. I started realizing that little small jobs for a year or so here and there, that was a blemish on my resume, and that became one of the first things employers would see. They wouldn't see me and what I could bring to the table, what I could commit to. They understand that I could commit to the Army, but they didn't understand that I could also commit to them. So that was one of the things I had to readjust how I looked at. My approach to transitioning into the civilian world was how I was going to sell myself and get them to understand that I could also commit to a company and bring the same amount of training, wealth of knowledge, and skills to your company as I did with the military. So the transitioning began with the inner look at what I was able to do and what I was willing to, start up, and I had to look inside myself and what I was able and what I was willing to do. So that's where the transition first began, it began with myself.
As a personal
look, in a personal stage.
Adventure or...
Right.
Mr. Cleary?
Margaret, my transition was actually really good. I actually kind of outsourced, I guess if you would, my job search, meaning that I worked with an executive search firm. And when I first left the military, I was still living in New York, but I knew that my wife and I, we talked and we wanted to move to Southern California. for obvious reasons. So I started talking with this firm, and they immediately kind of found out a number of employers. They held this conference, and when I talked with them, they said, sure, coming out to California, we have everything already set up. We just need you to show up, and we'll take care of all the interviewing. So when I arrived, I interviewed with 8 companies in a matter of 2 days. Of those 8 companies, I had 7 yeses. And of course, the one that bothered me was the one that said no, but I came to find later they didn't hire anybody, so it was okay. But the gist was, I felt like the company at least, had done a really good job preparing me to talk with companies, to be out there and get to know who they were and to let them know who I was. So I was able to really market myself very, very well and very easily. They gave me some really great hints, and it worked well for me.
Okay. Mr. Vilalobos?
My experience was interesting. I'm from Texas, so I enlisted out of Amarillo, Texas. My ex-wife, upon separation, is from California. So when I started thinking about either re-enlisting or getting out of the service, one of the main questions was, am I going back to Texas? Am I staying in California? And if I'm staying in California, what am I going to do? Where am I going to work? Am I going back to school? That was the main question for me, whether I was going to stay or leave, and what I was going to do after getting out of the service. I was fortunate enough to find someone who was able to help me transition or translate my skills in the military to civilian skills, and I started working part-time. And as many other veterans, I realized that the GI Bill was going to be the way to go. I knew I wanted to go back to school, and I had no idea what I wanted to accomplish out of that, but I knew that I had income. If I would have some income if I went back to school, so that was my very first choice, and I supplemented that with a part-time job. But I think that trying to figure out whether I was going to stay or leave was one of the most stressful experiences, and not knowing what I was going to do, going from receiving a paycheck biweekly in the military to no income at all was also very stressful, which led me to start thinking about re-enlisting and possible careers with the Marine Corps. At the time, they were reducing numbers, so my re-enlistment didn't go through, if you can believe that. I got out as an E5, so again, the not knowing what I was going to do, that just added to my stress level. So that was my experience transitioning from the military to the civilian world.
An interesting thing is none of the 3 of you mentioned working with or going through your particular branch's TAP program and assisting you in segueing from the military and transition into the civilian sector.
Right.
Could you talk about why?
I can putting it. I actually did go through the TAP class that we had when I was in New York, and I've also had the good fortune of working with other TAP officers since leaving the service. And one thing I can tell you is this: they are not all created equally. I think I saw Janelle.
Yes, she's right over
There she is. Hers is actually pretty awesome. They take the time to teach guys all about completing their resumes. They take the time to talk to them about interviewing and getting them prepped up. They kind of go the extra mile out there to help you do some realistic preparation for what you're going to expect when you meet up with a real hiring authority out there. The TAP program that I came through was not nearly as extensive. They spent the bulk of their time really just talking about what your military benefits were, and telling you where you could, if you died, you'd go to Arlington Cemetery if you liked, or which is great information. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't really going to help me get a job. So again, working with my TAP office, they weren't nearly as thorough as me going to someplace else.
Yeah, I went through 3 different TAP offices in my time. I went through the Fort Irwin TAP office, Fort Bliss for one deployment, and Fort Lewis for another deployment earlier in my career. So just like Stephen said, it was pretty much telling you where you could apply for memorial services when you die, Arlington Cemetery, and some small bits of resources, how you do your resume in one page. The things that they told you just seemed like it was a checklist on the TAP offices of what it was they needed to get across to us to get us processed through that. It was just a checklist. And on the soldier side, from a soldier perspective, you're really kind of just looking to get out of there. So you're going through the motions, so to speak. So they're on two parts. You know, everybody's guilty on two parts. The soldier just wants to get out of there, provide me the resources, show me a couple formats of how to do my resume. I'm fine, thank you, see you later, check my box, sign and say I've been here. That's on the soldier side, but at the same time, I haven't been through all the TAP offices, but the ones I've been through were basically the same, they felt the same way. Come in, sit down, sign in, check the box. You guys want to leave early? Great, thank you. Here's a couple samples of how you do your resume. When I was still in Iraq, I realized one thing, that wasn't going to work for me. I took the investment of having my resume professionally done. So when this guy came back with a 3-page resume, you know, I'm in Iraq, he's in New York. I wanted to, if I could smack him, I could, but I said, are you crazy? You're never going to get this 3 pages in front of a hiring manager. He says, trust me, this is what they need. They want to know as much about you as they can before they see your face. I said, this is never going to work. But what else did I have? I was coming home to no job. So the worst thing I could do was try it. It got me in front of a lot of interviewers. It wasn't by way of the TAP office. They just provided a few resources that you know, basically, they're just there.
From the soldier side, it's kind of like you don't see the value.
Right, you don't really see the value. It's a checkbox. Yeah. You know, again, I had to go out on my own limb to say, this is as far as I want to go. Now, if the TAP offices said we need to go that additional distance to do something like get the soldiers, because Army, and much like Marines and all the other branches, get your point across first and worry about the details later. So that 1-page resume, I'm this is what I could do, and then all the details just kind of fall off by the wayside in the rest of the resume. If they get a 2-page, great, but you really don't sell yourself as what your transferable skills are, what you're capable of doing, what do you know, what talent you have, because that's on another page that soldiers probably won't bring out. That's on the first page, is that first line, that summary. So the transition offices really didn't provide me with that standpoint of how to approach hiring managers and interviewers, of getting yourself out there on paper first, if that helps.
My experience with the TAP program was a bit difficult. I spent probably 50% of my time looking for a medium-size glove insert and a large-size leather glove. At the time, the Marine Corps was transitioning to civilian contractors, and they wouldn't sign off your paperwork unless you turned in exactly what you were given before we deployed to Iraq. So unless I was able to find those two things, they were not going to sign my paperwork. So spent most of my time doing that. I was on paper moving back to my state, which was Texas, and I didn't really get a lot of services that some of the other members were receiving who lived here in California. I think they were more interested in getting me to find what they needed me to turn in order for me to get all the signatures I needed so I could go on terminal. So it was difficult for me to attend the classes because I was more focused on finding the gear I was missing that got either blown up or disappeared in Iraq. And I just didn't have the time to really go to the classes. So that was a very stressful period for me, not knowing what benefits I was entitled to upon being discharged from the service. Not knowing where my local VA was, that was another issue. And these are all questions that I brought to the table, but because I was more focused on finding the right year to turn in, I never really got an answer to. So that was my experience with the TAP program.
On a personal note, I actually had a very similar experience. In fact, I never actually got through the door. I separated and cleared from Fort Campbell, and when I showed up to the TAP office, they looked at my MOS and said, "We have nothing for you here, so give me your clearing papers, we'll check it, and you can be on your way." So I never even got in the door at TAP. So despite your experiences, whether you had to go out personally, as many of you, as most of you did, and personally invest time and money into finding services that would help you transition, you managed to all find what seems to be enjoyable and rewarding employment. How did you get there without the assistance?
I had to take a look at what I did in the military and how I worked. I enlisted as a private and worked my way up, and now I'm a captain in the National Guard. And that wasn't a short road. It was a long road traveled. I mean, it required a lot of work. And I imagine it had to be the same way on the civilian side. So when I heard about becoming a bus operator, I thought, well, and then I heard the quote that this is the job that's standing in the way of the job that you want. So I started with the bridge program, finished that, went through that, hey Tony, went through the bridge program with, and then I started on with the OCI at Metro. So once I finished that, graduated OCI, I ended up going to a division. The ironic part about that was every step of the way, I told people that I didn't want to stay a bus driver. I told them what I wanted to do. I told them what I could bring to the table. I told them what talents that I had. You know, it was kind of daring because you just don't, you know, run around telling people I don't want to be a bus driver, I want to do this. Well, why are you here? You know, you risk that response. But ironically, at the division, the TOS, the transportation officer, operations manager, supervisor, was the father of a kid that I was in Iraq with. He was another captain. He was in Iraq with me. You know, I never drew the connection between how they spoke. They sounded alike, looked alike, everything. And he said, "Jerry's my son." You know, when I said, I was in Iraq with that guy. So he took me serious enough to make a few calls and sat me down at the main office at Metro with somebody who then later sat me down in front of my current boss, Lonnie Mitchell, who is a retired Navy officer, captain. And I told him my story and my feelings and that I didn't want to remain a bus driver. And some weeks later, he called me with, I got this team of folks working on a veterans hiring initiative, and we think you would fit right in. And that's basically how I wrote in. I have a great passion for it, great guidance from my supervisor, Suzanne Lauver, who's here too. It just seemed to be a fit because he says I speak the language, being a recent returning vet, and what it sounds like, we're all on the same sheet of music, is trying to get these veterans inundated with our civilian jobs and counterparts and everything. So that was my role, but it came again with the self-realization that I'm going to have to start from the bottom and work my way up. But it also came with a luck of the draw that I was in Iraq with the guy who was now my transportation supervisor.
You never know where those contacts are.
Right. You never know. So if you keep your mouth shut, you never know what you could have had if you opened it up and said something, you know?
Yeah, go on.
Mine was a little less lucky and I think more calculated, I guess you would. Just because where I was stationed for my last job in the Navy, it wasn't on a regular base. I was actually with a DOD, another DOD agency. So there weren't a lot of other military personnel around. I didn't have those folks that were already in the, who'd come from my base and gone to the private sector who I could talk with and try to network with. So instead, that's why I went to and talked with the executive search firm. I thought, man, if I know I don't have a network out there. I don't know, anybody that works at GE or Pepsi or in Silicon Valley or in LA at all. But I need to know somebody that does. So when I talked with that firm, that was their whole purpose and whole role for me, was that they were the network. They were the folks I could tap into, talk to about who their friends were, talk to those folks about who the hiring authorities were, the people that could actually make the decisions. And then from there, it was just a matter of getting in front of them and selling them on me. Because a lot of times you hear talk about companies looking for folks who have the perfect qualifications or the perfect resume or this kind of experience or certification. But what I learned is that companies don't always hire the person that's the most qualified. Mm-hmm. They hire the person they like. Mm-hmm. And if you can get in front of them and talk to them, kind of explain a little bit about your military background, let them kind of see the way you carry yourself, 9 times out of 10, well, at least 7 out of 8 for me, it's going to go over pretty well.
My first job interview was with Target, actually. And I remember the human resources specialist, she came out and pulled me aside and asked me more about my military career. And the reason why she asked me that question was because her brother had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. And she noticed that his resume talked, all about his service in the military. She didn't really quite understand it. She worked with him on translating those skills. So I ended up landing a job as a team member at Target, which I loved for some reason. I was there for 6 months. I was already enrolled at Long Beach City College. I was a work study student with a VA office there. And in 2008, after I transferred from Long Beach City to Cal State Long Beach, I ran into someone from U.S. Vets. And I was informed that there was an opportunity with U.S. Vets as an outreach specialist. So I applied, got the job, got promoted to a case manager eventually. And I ended up leaving U.S. Vets for 9 months to finish my master's degree. I stayed in touch with people in the company, and I can honestly tell you that at every single intersection, once I started at Long Beach City College and I transferred to Cal State Long Beach and USC, I've been fortunate enough to have someone there, another veteran, Army, Marine Corps, whatever the case may have been, who was able to point me in the right direction. So for me, that was God sent. I was able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish thanks to the help of a fellow veteran. I was able to apply for positions that I was really interested in thanks to a fellow vet. And my experience at school really did open the door for me to do more. I was on track I was actually going to apply to a clinical program. I was really interested in psychology, so I took the GRE. I was going to apply to a clinical program, and I wanted to get my PhD in psychology. Well, I realized that USC had the veteran sub-concentration through the social work program, and that just really got my attention, and I realized then that was my calling. I really wanted to work with veterans. I wanted to do more for the veteran community, and I wanted to do what all those different individuals did for me at those different intersections that got me to where I am today. If it wasn't for those guys, I honestly don't think I would be here today. So the power of networking, education, it all came together for me, and I was able to do what I really wanted to do. So that was my experience with it.
The interesting thing is, as all three of you have served, you have now all found yourself in jobs where you are now kind of serving the military again. Mm-hmm. Yes. What do you find as the unique experiences that the current veterans who are coming out and trying to now transition just like you did, what do you feel are their challenges and some of the barriers and experiences that they're having with transitioning into civilian life?
I would say selling yourself. Mm-hmm. So many years of being in the service, you've been on a squad, you've been in a platoon, you've been in a company, you've been part of a battalion, under a brigade. Everything that you do in the service, you did as a team. You did with someone. going into an interview, you're doing that alone. So when someone asks you to talk about your experiences, give me an example of X, Y, Z, you're going to give them the we story. We did this. We built the bridge in Iraq. We did, all these things. You're going to give them the we story. They want to know the you story. But how to get a soldier to get out of we and really sell himself or herself to a hiring manager. So I think that would be the biggest challenge, is getting them into the I, the me. I am now a team of one. You're trying to support now your family. Your team is now your family, your spouse, your kids. I think that after several different interviews, like I said, my resume got me the interviews, but I still had some fine tuning to do as far as what I needed to do to sell myself, and that was to break out of the we did this mode. And when I started doing that, I started realizing it's about me right now. From here on out, I got to do this on my own. So now I start going into, because you really feel like the company wants to hear what you're going to do for them, with them. So you're still kind of believing that we mindset of you could take this company and help them achieve their next goal. So you're still saying we a lot, but right at that particular moment, you need to sell you. So I think the biggest hurdle for transitioning soldiers is learning how to sell themselves and their skills to a hiring manager.
That's a good point.
I have two things I usually say that are troubling for veterans. Camaraderie, that loss of it, which is kind of what Joseph was saying here, that you go from the we to the me. And again, just like he was saying, when you go inside an interview and you're talking with somebody, they don't really want to hear about the team. They want to know about your particular contribution. And trying to change that mindset when you've been doing it for the last 4, 5, 10 years, it is sometimes challenging. The other thing that I think today's veterans really miss is the sense of purpose that you get while you're in the military.
Right.
I mean, along with that camaraderie, you're working on something that's bigger than you,
Right.
much bigger than you. And I think when you go to corporations, you don't always understand what their sense of purpose really is. That's something that for veterans is always kind of with you and something you're always looking for. That's probably part of the reason why all three of us are still working with the veterans now. It's that sense of something that's bigger than you still want to work for. And the last thing I think also is just some old military habits that are sometimes challenging to get past during the interview process. Like, for example, when you're talking with hiring authorities and just saying something simple like, sir or ma'am. In the military, that's something you are saying every other day, depending on who you're speaking with. It really is so common. But when you walk out in the private sector, that's not always appreciated. I mean, I've had different hiring authorities come back and tell me, all right, it was cute the first time or two, but, about halfway, and I'm like, okay, my name is Barbara. Please just go with that. Ma'am makes me think you're talking about my mother, So just little habits like that it still, just takes a little while for us for a lot of veterans to break free of.
I think one of the main issues would be translating their military skills to civilian skills. A lot of the veterans that I work with have no idea on how to do that. They show up to a job interview with a resume that tells the hiring manager that they were a sergeant in the Marine Corps, 4 years of experience leading Marines. They were in charge of millions of dollars worth of equipment, but that doesn't really tell them exactly what they are good at. It doesn't really tell them that they have great skills, and that stresses them out. I mean, not really knowing what you're doing wrong when you're applying to 15, 20 jobs and you don't get a single yes after 15 or 20 interviews can be very stressful. And I think that's one of the main issues that our veterans are dealing with. Another issue for over 20% of our vets is mental health issues that go without any treatment. That may play a role as well. I think we're all very well aware that a lot of our veterans are dealing with those issues and they don't get an opportunity to deal with them before they apply for jobs, which can add on to the stress and the problems that they're dealing with. But I think that for those who are getting out of the service, they are looking at going back to school, or those who are looking at going back to work, getting those skills translated into something that an employer can understand. And as he said, you know, the military culture is very rigid, at least for us in the Marine Corps. You know, if you're walking around with a purpose. And a lot of times employers may not necessarily, I don't want to say like that, but it can be very intimidating. So if you're working in an environment that is very laid back, someone who just got out of the service is going to be extremely rigid. So learning how to transition from the military culture to a civilian culture, to where you can actually feel like you fit in and you're not being isolated by everybody else because you're extremely rigid, extremely goal-oriented. I think it's one of the things that our vets really need to learn and be coached on. And another thing I really wanted to say when I was talking before, I didn't mean to ignore civilians. There are plenty of civilians in my life who have contributed to my success, and I just want to make sure I thank those individuals as well. So.
Great. I'll kind of ask this as a last wrap-up type of question. I know we probably stand between you and your next cup of coffee, so we'll keep that in mind with the break coming up. And Mr. Vilalobos, we can start with you, so you're not always last. In conclusion, what advice would you give the 300 plus people in this room with regards to helping the vets that they serve transition successfully, whether it be assistance with transitioning in a language terminology perspective of their military training and education and knowledge to the civilian sector, or reaching out to veterans to serve, the veterans that aren't coming to them for help but that need the help? And then what further advice would you give them, especially as a veteran who had gone through the experience, in helping the next round of veterans that are coming into LA?
I would say for those of you, I mean, we have so many service providers here that for me to say, well, you need to take a look at the resources. You need to identify those veterans who may need mental health assistance. It's just sort of redundant. But for those of you who may not necessarily have experience working with veterans, identifying the resources in the community that will assist that veteran in transitioning into civilian life, that includes medical, mental health, the whole 9 yards. I mean, these are resources that are extremely important for our veterans. There are veterans walking around right now who don't have any idea that if they are service connected, they can qualify for vocational rehab and have their master's degree or bachelor's degree paid for. These are all resources that are going to assist the veteran better himself or herself. These are resources that are extremely important. If you're looking to hire veterans, familiarize yourself with military culture. All the skills that the veterans bring to the table, they may not necessarily be able to translate those themselves. So it's going to take work on the employer's part to take a look at that resume and perhaps even translate those skills so that they know that they're obtaining someone or hiring someone who's highly capable of doing what they want them to do. Those are some of the things that I would advise our providers to get familiar with, or our employers to be familiar with.
I actually like this question because it's a lot about what I'll be talking about in my breakout session. Awesome. I guess the bottom line is try to act as the frontline interviewer, as if you were working for the whole lot of companies that are out there. So when they come to you, you have to be the person that knows how to decipher the military jargon. A lot of times vets will come in and kind of like what Blas was saying, they're going to give you a resume that's going to have a boatload of acronyms on it. Learn how to both decipher the actual acronyms and then also just talk with the veterans about what the items actually mean. A lot of what they have on there, they may not, just because you get used to talking it all the time, they may not realize that you aren't really that familiar with it. They're probably thinking, you've talked to 1,000 vets here today, and like me, I might think, you've been talking to Navy guys for the last 10 years, and you know where CG-64, an Aegis cruiser out of Mayport, Florida, at a ComNav, LANT, you'll understand what I'm talking about, but you may have no clue. So just be ready to talk with them to find out how you can decipher the jargon they'll be speaking. And then as far as like reaching out to the veterans, I highly recommend you get in touch with the local TAP offices. They have the access. While TAP isn't mandated by all the forces, they at least see, you know, between, I think, at least 40% of the service members that are getting out every year. So talk with them. Reach out to them to talk about what people are actually are coming out and see how you can be part of their TAP programs.
I think with a lot of our community outreach resources that we have, like in this room, you guys meet with a lot of different employers. You're saying the same thing. How do we bring veterans to your company? One of the things you could probably have in that discussion is, how do you bring hiring managers to the understanding that this is a service member and they speak a little bit different. Their resume looks a little bit different, but that doesn't mean they don't have the skills and the qualities that you need for that position. Translating all those service skills into what that position requires. A lot of the service members have more than just their MOS that said they could be a mechanic. Other things below that, environmental safety officers, you know, all those things. Talk with those hiring managers and try and get them to understand that you're hiring. It's a little bit different step in a process in hiring a service member. I want to say that they're different, they're a different culture, they're a different type of person. That doesn't mean that they're special or elite, but handling them when you're coming out of the service, and a lot of people know that you have to have a regular resume and a federal resume, you know, so in some sort they have to be prepared to create two different resumes for whatever walk of life they get into. And I think with a lot of corporations, they do sensitivity training with their managers and their HR folks. What about enrolling something like a veteran hiring sensitivity training, where these HR groups are taught how to view and identify things in a resume that comes from a service member? Because, I mean, aside from the jargon, every company has its own jargon. And the military is no different. That's a company as well. It has its own jargon. But HR, they're being taught how to read jargon that comes from McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, transportation, BNSF. They're taught how to read that jargon from another company and say, okay, so you know this program, you know this format, you know these steps and procedures. Maybe a sensitivity training that's going to get these HR groups to learn a little bit of veteran or service member military training that makes them sensitive and empathy to try and take some of those resumes that come from service members, whatever branch, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, or whatever, and say, okay, so you use this program when you were an admin officer over at the Army or the Navy. Okay, and I think that's one of the things that might be a breakthrough for helping transitioning soldiers, because this next wave that's going to be coming out is going to be devastating when they have no place to go, and then HRs are still in the Stone Ages about how to bring a service member into their company.
Well, if you would all join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their experiences with us.